Hello, wonderful listeners. So today we have chapter 19. And in the last chapter, Elika finally leaves Iceland and catches a plane to Kathmandu, Nepal. Let us find out what happens when she gets there. They landed without the ice giant appearing, and Elika felt deeply relieved. But she felt stressed again when they got to the city. Elika took her first steps in Kathmandu, Nepal. Everything was unfamiliar, and she felt dizzy from all the new sights, sounds, and smells. Another thought made her feel worse. It was hot. If the ice giant teleported now, she would melt for sure. A rickshaw, a carriage pulled by a bicycle, rattled by. Elika felt a whoosh of wind as she stepped back onto the sidewalk. "It's so crazy here," Elika said, eyeing the stream of traffic in front of her. Cars, buses, motor scooters, rickshaws, bicycles, and pedestrians shared the road. It was chaos. A million smells filled her senses. She couldn't even distinguish them. Sweat, fried dumplings, chili, she thought as they hurried down the uneven sidewalk to meet Caroline's Sherpa friend Mike. She stared at a yak being led down the street. It had on a heavy pack, and the bells on its harness jingled. Aunt Caroline didn't seem to even notice the yak. She walked quickly through the narrow streets. Elika struggled to keep up. "I can't even keep up with you on the sidewalks," Elika said. "How am I going to hike into the mountains?" "Oh, Sherpa Mike and I agreed you aren't ready for a strenuous hike up into the high Himalayas," Aunt Caroline explained. "We're going to take a helicopter into the mountains. Besides, there isn't time to hike up. The ice giant could appear soon." Elika had never been in a helicopter. She felt afraid at the thought of going in one, but another thought made her more nervous. "What if she teleports while we're flying?" Elika said. "We better be quick," Aunt Caroline said and winked at Elika. They picked up their pace and hurried down the sidewalk. "Are helicopters really noisy?" Elika said, craning her neck to look at the colorful flags hung above the street. Aunt Caroline said there were prayer flags. They fluttered in the wind. Elika looked in front of her, just in time to dodge an old woman in a colorful dress. The woman was moving fast and almost smacked into her. "We'll have headphones to make the helicopter less noisy," Aunt Caroline said. "Don't worry, it'll all be fine." Elika was panting by the time they stopped at a corner. Sherpa Mike, who was an old Nepalese man with silver hair and beard, introduced himself. Another friend of Aunt Caroline's walked down the street to meet them. It turned out to be Edmund, Aunt Caroline's colleague. "Thank you so much for everything," Elika said to Edmund. "The ski jacket, the crampons, and sending your friends to rescue me from the ice giant's cave. I think you saved my life." Edmund grinned, his round cheeks red. "Congratulations to you," he said. "Not many have met an ice giant and survived the experience." Elika felt nervous. What could she say to this person that helped her so much? "Well," she said, "the chocolate bar in the pocket of that ski jacket was all I had to eat one day. You helped a lot." Edmund shrugged, though he smiled bigger. "I would do anything for your Aunt Caroline," he said, and smiled at her aunt. "Let's get going," Aunt Caroline said, smiling back at him. They piled into Sherpa Mike's truck, but just before Elika climbed in, she paused. A snowstorm seemed to be forming on the sidewalk. A snowstorm? In Kathmandu in July? But it was way too hot for snow. Elika was sweating from their hurried journey through the city, and she had stripped down to a t-shirt. Her heart sank when the snowstorm contracted into a dense cloud that formed arms, legs, and a head. The ice giant took shape. "We're too late," Elika yelled. The enormous ice giant was standing in front of them, and the sun was beating down on her unprotected head. The ice giant fixed her blue eyes on Elika's. At first she looked happy, but her smile quickly turned to a frown. "The sun! It is so strong," the ice giant said, covering her head with her ice hands. "Where are we?" "Kathmandu," Elika said sadly. "I'm so sorry we are late." The hot sun blazed down. Water already covered the ice giant in a film. "Run into the mountains," Aunt Caroline said, jumping out of the truck. "It's colder up there." "I feel too weak," the ice giant said. "The ice chalice, it made me feel weak, and now this awful heat." Elika looked around frantically for a solution, but she couldn't see one. The giant was way too big to fit into any of the air-conditioned shops. A scream rang out. A lady in an "I Love Nepal" t-shirt clutched her heart with fear. Other tourists gathered around, some shaking with fear and some snapping pictures. "What is it?" someone shouted. "It looks dangerous." Sherpa Mike stood in front of the giant and put his hands up in a calming gesture. "She is a giant, and giants are friends to us," he said. A Nepalese woman in a sari came and stood by him. 3 children in colorful outfits joined them. Soon there was a group standing in front of the ice giant, protecting her. The crowd of tourists grew bigger too. One picked up a stone and threatened to throw it at the ice giant. "No," Sherpa Mike said to him. "The amber giant has saved many lives. I tell you, giants are our friends." "She's sick," Elika yelled out to the group. The ice giant crouched down, trying to cover her head with her arms. Already, a puddle of water formed on the pavement. The ice giant met Elika's eyes again. "I am not sick," the ice giant said. "I am melting." Snowflake tears formed in her eyes and quickly turned to water. Despite the heat, goosebumps covered Elika's arms. The ice giant could die, but what could she do? The ice giant was getting thinner, right in front of the crowd. Everyone was silent, including the tourists. Suddenly, there was a lot of noise across the street. A group of people were hauling huge black machines from a ski shop. "Before we had those fancy snow machines, we had old-fashioned ice chippers," one of the strong-looking skiers said to Elika. They set up 3 machines around the giant and turned them on. They fed bag after bag of ice into the machines, and ice chips flew out the other end. Soon the ice giant was covered in a mist of ice. Elika couldn't see her anymore. "Ice giant!" Elika yelled into the mist. "How do you feel?" "Better," the ice giant said in a strong voice. "I am not melting, and I am not hot." "Problem is, we're going to run out of ice at this rate," one of the skiers said. "We can't just stay here forever, covering her in ice," another skier said, agreeing. Aunt Caroline spoke with the skiers, showing them her sketch pad. She must have an idea. Elika hoped it was a good one. "Do you think the ice giant would hold 2 machines over her head, one with each hand?" Aunt Caroline asked Elika. 2 skiers volunteered to keep feeding the ice in the machines while she runs into the mountains. Elika's eyes widened with awe at the skiers. It would be dangerous for them to be so high up in the hands of a running giant. But she couldn't think of another way to save the ice giant. Elika yelled the idea into the ice mist. "I don't trust humans," the ice giant yelled back. "But you have to," Elika said, "or the ice will run out and then you will melt." "We will trust you with our lives, and you will trust us with yours," one of the skiers yelled into the ice mist. After a few minutes of silence, an okay came out of the ice mist. The ice giant had agreed. The courageous skiers pushed the big machines into the ice mist. Elika couldn't believe how brave they were. A minute later, the ice giant stood up, a machine and a human in each hand. She raised her hands up so the ice chips formed a cloud around her head. Elika could see her body was thin from melting. The ice chips were protecting her head and shoulders, but her legs and feet were hot and melting. "Run!" Elika yelled up towards the ice giant's head. "Run, but please don't hurt the people." The ice giant ran towards the mountains. Elika watched her go, a huge giant with an ice mist around her head. "Don't worry, Elika," Aunt Caroline said and winked. "The craziest ideas are usually the ones to work. Now let's get to the helipad and follow them." All right, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next video in chapter 20. Okay, bye.